You're listening to Cool and Unusual Punishment Presents Chosen. This is episode 15. My name is Tyler. Joining me as always, my co-host Jodie. Jodie, how are you doing?
Pretty good, brother. Okay,
Jodie, what's this podcast about?
This podcast is about spiritual abuse occurring at Valley Brook Church in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, during a very specific period of time, ending 2015. No comment on Valley Brook Church as it operates today. And guess what? I don't think this is the last episode. So
Yeah, this is, as I understand it, this is going to be our last episode.
Yeah, it's not though.
Okay.
It just turned out that it's not going to be the last episode. And we've been doing this for over a year now, I realized. And I appreciate everybody for listening and supporting us. I have a story, I guess, to tell you this evening.
I'm listening.
Okay. So I hope everybody remembers the episode about the chosen paper.
Yes.
And throwback to the episode where we played clips of the message or sermon in which there was also some chosen talk. If everybody recalls, this is pretty early in the series.
That kind of accompanied the paper around the same time that kind of got into discussing.
Preceded it.
That sort of discussed the nature of not everybody making it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was like where the knitting thing came up as well. Yeah. They were just starting to really pack in the fringe thoughts. Well, I spoke to Kaylee Evergreen, who is actually the person that her questions as a teenager were what were responsible for the chosen message becoming a paper. So she listened to the sermon. She was troubled. She messaged Doug and Nate, and they in turn took her questions and turned it into a
dissertation. Yeah. Okay.
So we will get to that, but you know, there's more to her story than just this. So Kaylee was born into Valley Brook. Her mom in the pre-Doug era was a leader of the children's ministry. So she was, you know, they were like rooted in that church, right? Yeah. And she started going to middle school youth group. And as we were talking, she was having these random memories. And one of them was she was in a position in some other part of her life to sort of plan some curriculum that would be like youth group like, if that makes sense. So she asked the Valley Brook leader of the middle school youth group, like, how do you plan what you're going to talk about? Because she wanted to know for this other project. And this, she said, was like her earliest red flag. The response was, we don't have a curriculum. We just talk about whatever the Lord puts on our heart, and there's no guidelines. I mean, man, you know, imagine teaching without a plan. I mean, in some ways, like, you'd have a lot of extra time on your hands. So, okay, that was like the first time where she was like, oh, you know, okay. So she becomes best friends, like middle school best friends, with Doug's son. And that means she's over at their house a lot. And like, especially during the summer, Doug had a daughter with disabilities, and Kaylee would help her during church services sometimes. Her sister was actually an older sister was employed as a caregiver for this girl. So like, she wasn't just like going to Valley Brook. She had a pretty...
Yeah. And this is when Doug's pastor, I assume, he came and then,
Yeah. So she was, talking to me about like the dynamic of that family, which was pretty much just regular family stuff until high school, where things, she said, started to change and grew like icky. And what that looked like was just every time she was over there, they were constantly asking her how it was going for her in her home life. A familiar theme, like looking for the cracks.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And Kaylee herself said that like she has a very supportive, great family who, of course, like every other even great family, has little things going on. But there was like a persistent searching for something,
And her mom, I assume, is still with the church. I mean, at this time, though.
Oh, yes. So her sister, during the course of all this, is also starting to pull away. Her sister moves away, gets some space to grow from her parents. Young person, that's not the strangest thing out there. And Kaylee at this time was also starting to sort of shut down, as her parents observed and have talked to her even now, how they noticed a distancing happening, which, as we've seen and what we will get to, she took the youth wounded course. So, these fractures were not accidental, you know what I mean? So she's telling me about, like, they used to go out to eat a lot, and she has this very, very, very distinct memory of riding in the car with Doug and Robin, who's his wife, and he turns around, he puts his hand on her knee, and he says, "Your parents have never and will never love you. We're your family now." So she tries to brush this off. And you know how how it is when you talk to somebody, and I'm sure you have things like this, and I have things like this too, where, memories become muddy. I mean, first, her memories of this are crystal clear.
Right.
How there's these certain things that, like, you can just remember, every word of. And, like, it was very clear that she remembered every word of that. So she called that the beginning of the end for her. She was like 14 years old, and she didn't believe it. You're going to quite like this girl because she's a persistent kind of pain in the butt for these two. I mean, I was like listening when we were talking. I was so impressed because you have to think of this all also in the context of somebody who's in high school or middle school, or, like a very young person who's already self-aware enough to know, like, when you hear this, she just did not believe it.
Yeah.
And, like, put a red flag in her brain.
I mean, not that he didn't do this to a lot of people, but I wonder how much of this is like a matter of opportunity, and that she was friends with Doug's daughter, and like, well, she was around a lot, and so she was just an easy mark, like, as far as Doug was concerned. That's why I was asking if the mom was still at the church at the time, because, like, what a weird thing to be like, oh yeah, your family kind of sucks, like, well, they're also with the church, like, why are you doing this to them? Well,
boy, it gets even stranger.
Okay.
Not from Doug himself, but like, it gets strange. This next thing I'm going to tell you is very strange. There was another occasion around the same period of time where they were going out to eat again. And it was, for some reason, Doug's wife was in another car. So it was just Kaylee and Doug in the car. And he says to her, I will give you $10 if you flip off my wife in the car. And then he made up a song filled with swear words and was like singing it to her. And Kaylee, now my brain can't remember it. Oh, I can't remember it. I'm going to have to ask her because I don't remember. But it was like a rhymey song.
Right.
And he like, Kaylee, like something like that. And he kept wanting her to do this thing where she gave his wife in another car the middle finger and she wouldn't do it. And this was before she went to the wounded course. She felt like now, at least upon reflection, that this was a boundary tester to see what. I mean, how bizarre.
It's weird.
It's weird.
It's weird. It would be weird if he wasn't a pastor.
Yeah. It's weird. I mean, it's just so.
I don't know. It's also not like it's the flipping the bird thing is like, as a joke, is like harmless. It's just unusual. Like, what a weird thing to want. Like, it'll be really funny if you give my wife the finger.
Yeah, and you are a young teenager, and I'm your pastor.
Yeah, yeah. It's weird.
Yeah, I don't. Her point that it was like a boundary tester to see like how far can I push this person? Is she like receptive to?
Sure.
Not in like even inappropriate way. Just
I was
culty
thinking the
way.
same thing because it's. I mean, thank God it's this story on the whole hasn't been like sexual or anything that. But like you could see someone exerting power for a reason like this is just confusing.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is where she stops going to their house after that. And after this, at some point, Kaylee does Wounded for Youth.
Yep.
There's that big push. Everybody needs to go to Wounded. Everybody is wounded. Everybody has trauma. And there was a youth group version, which was so large that they had to go into two groups. Interestingly enough, the curriculum is exactly the same as the adult version.
Oh, okay. I mean, I guess it's something, if you had a course, it makes sense to have a youth version of it. In this context, it just feels like a more fruitful pool of they're closer to their family because they're younger and also probably at an age where they're more likely to have like grievances with their family. Like it just seems like a much more a profitable like pool of contestants. Like if you're going to try and see these things, like start when they're teenagers. What a great idea.
Yeah. And it was pretty great because when I was talking to Kaylee, who has a baby, her wife was also like in the room, who also went to Valley Brook, is 6 years older, so they did not have like overlap. But her wife also went to Wounded as a youth. But back then there was no youth version. So they just went to the adult version, which is crazy because like, there's like real adult scenarios and issues. And to think that like, somebody was a teenager listening to that stuff, but hers was youth. So she identifies in the course of this, like, oh, as a kid, I have had anxiety and I didn't know how to label it or anything like that. But it was like very much encouraged in this to pin it on her parents, like to make her parents the enemy. If everybody recalls when we talked about the Wounded course in great length, there's this part towards the end where you have to write a letter.
Yeah.
And there were some times when the letter was encouraged to be delivered and there was...
Yeah, to actually send it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Kaylee, because she's like an incredibly cool high schooler, had this idea like, well, I should be writing this letter to myself. Like I've been kind of self-sabotaging myself with anxiety.
That's incredibly immature.
Yeah, she's cool. So they're like, no, you can't do that. You have to write the letter to your dad. She also mentioned like everybody in there. It was like pin it on your parent. Like,
Yeah.
just this overall theme, right? Which, then creates a bunch of like teenagers who view the church and Doug as their parent. Or
Yeah.
she also mentioned the bit that I had brought up before, like no comfort if you're crying, you get your comfort for God.
That's right.
There's no hugging, So the one thing that she mentioned that I didn't know about was that there was a styrofoam heart you would pass around, and you would write on each other's hearts every week something true about the person. So she had this memory of doing this, right? She was in a group where they had to deliver the letter. This part's actually quite sad. In the letter, she essentially calls her dad an abuser, and she didn't want to. She basically has to manufacture this letter where her dad's an abuser. And the reason why is because he's tired and crabby when he comes home from work. That's like all she had. And like, as we're talking, she's like, I'm the same way when I come home from work. Yeah. Sometimes I'm tired and crabby. And it's like, yes, that's just being an adult person. She delivers the letter to him, and her dad is like sobbing. And like in her mind, she's like, it's okay, Dad. Because of course, to her, it's not a big deal because she just had to write this.
Yeah, she's trying to just get through class.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like her dad still has this letter.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh man.
I know, right? Yeah, I know. It made me so sad. And I told her, I'm like, you've got to tell your dad to get rid of that letter.
Yeah.
And to like just let it go, because like this is now, and I just talked to her, how many kids did the same stuff, you know what I mean? And maybe didn't have as supportive of, like, everything is fine with her and her relationship with their family now, but like,
yeah, I mean, how many people cut their family out and didn't come to enlightenment later?
Yeah. Right. It's crazy because, like, it's like permanent damage.
Yeah.
It's permanent damage. So there's 3 events that are going to happen that lead up to her not going to youth group at Valley Brook. So this is going to get strange. Kaylee was part of youth group, even though she had stopped being like close to Doug's family in the same way.
Yeah.
She went to youth group in high school. There was a leader who was a female who was teaching the youth group. And there was this night when this woman walked around and was snapping all the girls' bras and trying to unhook them.
Was there a reason?
Like, Kaylee said this person was extremely immature. So that's the reason. I don't.
Now, how old is the?
I got the impression that it was not like a young an adult.
Young adult. I'm
Yeah.
guessing. Okay.
Yeah. So that happens, and Kaylee tells her mom after a couple of days, and is like, "You need to know what's happening." So the mom calls somebody who is affiliated with the youth group leadership, right? And says, this happened, right? Or her mom emails this person.
Yeah.
And there's a meeting that then happens involving Kaylee and this like leadership youth pastor and the person who claims they don't remember this happening, but they're sorry if they were offended.
Uh-huh.
So, I mean, hello, gaslighting.
Yeah.
Like, that's actually that's like sexual assault.
Yeah.
And it's happening at your church. And to be then put in the room with the person who did it, who's then like, I don't remember that
Look,
happening.
I'm sorry if you think I did that. I'm sorry.
Like, who couldn't remember doing that? And like, why? That's number one of the three things. Okay. So.
Well, also, it would be, if you were to take that at face value, it's probably also a problem if your youth leader doesn't remember what they're doing in these classes.
Yeah. And how funny, though, that like still they were a youth leader.
Yeah.
You know, like some things just get a big sigh from me. Okay. Number 2.
Uh-huh.
So Kaylee's brother was also in youth group, but he was older. And he became a youth leader, like seniors in high school. Like this was the age where, you know, they thought, oh, you're old enough now to lead a group.
Well, it's not like, I mean, they weren't picking the most qualified adults either. So I guess what difference does it make?
Yeah, that's a great point. Her brother starts shutting down as well. And there's all of this pressure on her brother as like a high schooler to like get more kids into youth group. You know, like it reminds me of like Wall Street, right?
Yeah.
So she's observing this and she approaches Kaylee, the head of the same guy as the other scenario, and says like, she points out like, that's not my brother's job to recruit.
Right.
He's a senior in high school and he's very stressed out and you're putting way too much pressure on my brother. She says this to this guy and he's completely speechless, as in he literally says nothing. So she was like, this isn't fun for my brother anymore. And literally nothing is said. So when she goes to youth group that night, she's pulled aside. And she's told that this youth leader guy, he's very hurt by her words. And she needs to apologize to him.
The person she went to?
Yeah. So the head of the youth stuff. So she then finds out, oh, he's very hurt by what you said, and you need to apologize to him. Like your words about your brother to him really hurt him. Of course, in that moment, he said nothing to her, but then afterwards scrambled and talked to others who then became part of this and were like, Kaylee, we need to talk to you. We're going to pull you out of youth group. And you need to know that what you said earlier today to this guy, like really hurt his feelings. And you should really apologize to him. And she's like, I don't want to apologize to him. She felt so uncomfortable that she eventually gives a flat apology. Just like, yes, I'm sorry I did that. I'm sorry my words hurt you. And then everything's great again, of course. Oh, yay, you know. So she is now older and expected to be a youth group leader as she got older. And there's this mission trip that comes up to Tennessee where it's like an impoverished part where it's like we're going to paint houses and things like that. It's funny, like I was talking to her and it's like, I wonder how that works. Like, because obviously you can't just walk around with like a paint can.
Hey, yeah.
Yeah.
We're
there
missionaries.
Must be some formal, whatever. But So she doesn't really want to go, but she's going to do it. And she has to fundraise. And it's very funny because there were several members of her family who were like, we'll give you money, but we don't want this money to go to that church. This money needs to be like for Kaylee. If Kaylee needs clothes or food or for her expenses. So there must have been people in her family who were like, this church is crazy. We want to support her because we love this family, but we don't want this money to go to the church.
We want to support our daughter as a young person traveling. We don't want to support the church that's sending her.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. So she ends up making like $200 over what she's supposed to have fundraised, right? And all the checks had to be made out to Valley Brook. Okay. So they get this excess money and they approach the church and are like, well, we got more than was asked. Is there a way that like that excess money can go to Kaylee because she needed this is going to be like a very physically intensive thing. So like clothes just designated for this trip, not to ruin like nice clothing or food or whatever. And they're like, no. And like, she actually still feels bad about this because here these people wrote all these checks to Valley Brook. And for some of them, the promise was this money can like go towards me. And like, no, that was not the case at all. They got like a very small stipend for food, and whatever. So she went on the trip. She was completely miserable. Nobody talked to her. She was like excommunicated in the course of this trip. She did the service projects. Like they redid insulation. They painted porches. It was a high drug community. So there was like a lot of like stuff that needed to be done, right? So she said she was completely alienated on this trip. Came back. It was summer. She stopped going to youth group, but still went to church. That's when the Chosen sermon happens, right? It was like over Christmas break, which aligns with, if people recall, it was like in the early part of the new year of 2015. Yes. So she hears the Chosen message. And sends this email on Monday, which would be the day after she heard the message.
Yeah.
Monday, December 8th, 2014, 9:46 p.m. to Doug and Nate. Subject, Chosen people. Hey, Nate/Doug, it's Kaylee. So after listening to your message on Sunday, I was just left with a lot of questions that I don't know how to find the answer to. So I wanted to see if you could help clarify some things for me. You talked about how God hated Escu, which I might be butchering. It's ESCU, SQ. And she says, or however you spell his name, and that no matter what he did, God would tear him down because he wasn't chosen. This left me really confused because I thought God loved all his children but hated their sin. So if Escu was to have wanted God in his life heart, would God have accepted him, or would he just tear him down because you said whatever Escu did, God tore him down? And if God didn't accept him, why? Because isn't God supposed to accept all of his children if they truly seek him?
Are you talking about Esau? ESAU?
It might be. It's ESCU, but maybe it's Esau. Because she doesn't know how to spell it. So maybe she was just spelling it wrong. So then in turn, I'm reading it wrong. Esau
was the brother of Jacob. He loved Jacob and hated Esau. Why? He never says, but he does seem to have a thing for taking the younger, the weaker, and the scoundrel and making something out of them.
So that's got to be the guy.
Yeah. I'll look into it more and I'll figure out how much of this we have to cut out.
Okay. Cool. Also, the whole chosen people thing is confusing to me. Because aren't we all God's children chosen by him? Doesn't he love us all? Like, why am I chosen to know God and others aren't? Does that mean others are never meant to know God? But aren't we supposed to spread the word of God to all, show them God's love? So that means others get to know God. And if they choose to accept God but aren't chosen by him, what's that mean? What is a chosen person? Is it someone God loves? God loves us all. So aren't we all chosen? Is it someone who accepts God into their life? So anyone can become chosen? Are some believers chosen and others not? Are only God's chosen people allowed in heaven? You made it sound like some people are predestined to become chosen people while others are not. So are only some people predestined to go to heaven and others not? I just don't understand like any of it. I got the God bending your will and living a chosen life, but the whole God hating and chosen people has my head spinning. Thanks for your help, Kaylee. So again, let's just remember that this is a high school student sending this, right? How incredibly insightful to have all these questions, you know? So she sends that after hearing the sermon that we played much earlier in this series, right? So they write back and say, this is a great email. And this is on December 9th at 10:20 a.m. from Doug and Nate. This is a great email. In fact, we think your questions and the answers could really help other people get to the truth. So if you don't mind being a little patient, we would like to put together a handout that could be given to a whole lot of people. You can have the first one. Thank you for your heart. We love you. She says, okay, I'll be waiting for that handout. Thanks for your help time. Love you both, Kaylee. December 27th, 2014. Subject. And here it is, the answer to your questions. Good morning, Kaylee. You might not have guessed it, but your email sparked something that created a 17-page paper. We took your questions and the questions that we got from other people. So apparently she wasn't the only one. And we've been working to put together a paper that will hopefully answer all of them. We've had the staff and the overseers reading through this paper, making suggestions and corrections. So a lot of work has gone into this ! Smiley face. The paper is almost to its final stages, and we're going to make it available to Valley Brookers in the new year. So we thought we would let you see our progress and let you read it through while you're out of school. Hopefully it all makes sense to you. Let us know what you learn. How's that for people taking you seriously? Question mark, question mark, ! Smiley face. We love you, Doug and Nate.
Uh-huh.
So it's just so much love. I didn't.
How's that for people taking you seriously?
That's not even where I thought you might laugh, but we're getting there. And also, I'm really glad that you also found that funny. And like inside, right? These guys have this message, and it's hilarious and awesome that a young woman's persistent questions turn into the paper, which was like, of course, that was before Grant's letter. And but like the turning point for many people to be like, actually, this is crazy.
Well,
I
think it's telling that, I mean, obviously Doug's spiritual philosophy is unusual in a way that probably requires a 17-page paper. But at its core, like, she's not asking super complicated questions.
Yeah.
Like, they are questions that if you believe this, like, you would expect he would have easy answers for relatively simple questions. If like this doesn't seem to, this seems to conflict with my idea of it shouldn't require like the whole team of Valley Brook to come together to write a paper on it if it's so straightforward.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I feel like this was quite a pivot.
Yeah.
So Monday, December 29th, 2014, subject chosen. Kaylee, There have been more revisions and it grew another page. Look what's happened with all your questions. It's great. Love you.
No. I would just hate to have like now you're associated with this. Like, here comes some more.
We love you so much. So that was the 29th. So now we're on New Year's Eve. Wednesday, December 31st, 2014. Subject chosen, Kaylee. Here's what we are going to do. We are resending you the paper. It has undergone a lot of changes and grown considerably since you last read it. Thank you for your dialogue. It's been helpful. This is a high school girl.
It's like she kicked over a rock that was like holding back a volcano or something. So wait a minute, isn't heaven for everybody? And it's just like the chain reaction that it's causing now is just oh no, what have I done?
I mean,
I've come up with whole new ideas. Here's a new revision.
Wait till you see what they're reduced to asking of her.
As a teenager.
As a teenager. Okay, that's what you've got to remember. Last time you read the paper, you felt a lot of emotion. It's hard to comprehend what something is saying when you feel a lot of emotions. So now that you know more where we are coming from, would you carefully read the paper, this time to understand fully what it is saying in each section? It doesn't even matter if you agree with it. Do you understand what it is saying? Are you able to connect the scriptures we presented to what we are saying? Do you clearly see the point that is being made? Read the paper like it's true this time, instead of looking for objections. That would be a great help to us. Can you imagine?
Beautiful.
This teenage girl has got these guys so rocked that they are like, can you just read it again? Do you understand the sentences? Okay.
Now, you're saying, how can this be true? But let me put this to you. Read it as if it were true. Doesn't that feel better?
All the answers to your current questions should be clearly spelled out in the paper. This will help us to know if we've done our job. This has been a big labor of love. It has been very time consuming with lots and lots of additions and revisions. You will even get to see how you affected the paper! Then you can let us know what remaining questions you have. It's been a blessing to see you really take this serious and dig in. We love you, Doug and Nate.
Does Kaylee feel at all like proud that that's like they've recognized something in her that like they have to, if this is gonna pass the smell test, they have to try and squeeze it past her? Like, is this acceptable?
I don't know if she recognized it, but like she has clearly scared these guys.
Yeah.
So that happens shortly after, because that's like, it's early January when this is released, right? So this is like on New Year's Eve when these guys should just be chilling.
If we can just get her on board.
Yeah, like this one teenage girl, which I don't want to underestimate the power of one, obviously.
Yeah.
And there were other people with questions too, but clearly she's the one who spearheaded this. It's undeniable, right? That happens. The chosen paper comes out and they get this paper and they read it, and they know another youth pastor from somebody else's church. They reach out to him and say, can we share this with you? And just please tell us your opinion. Mm-hmm. This is before everybody jumps ship, she's the first, but everybody fairly quickly is gone. And they're like, no. So then they video chat with another pastor And they're like, no, this is radical. This is somebody with their own agenda manipulating the word of God to fit it. So she stops going after that. Her family stops going after Grant's letter comes out and is released. And she hasn't been to church since. So that's her story. She's the reason why the chosen paper happened. She's the reason why a bunch of people were like, hold on, right before the shit really hit the fan with Grant and whatever. And one thing that I didn't entirely make clear from earlier too was like all that boundary testing and stuff is like, you know, when somebody like in a abusive relationship, like there's a good part in the beginning and then there's like these microaggressions to test. And then there's like the stuff, you know? And so she really witnessed that, you know, being born into the church, and then Doug comes and things were fine until then there's small red flags. And then there's him like specifically testing her. And then there's this thing that happens and there's all the bra snapping and all the weird stuff. And,
well, and I think that series of emails really reveals something that, you know, when we were talking about the paper and, you know, the ideology of it, like it was malleable in a way when he was trying to make it presentable, that he was sending drafts to this girl and like, how about this? Does this read better? It reveals that this wasn't as solid of a foundation as when he presented it. Like, you had questions, here's our answers. Like, he was doing this kind of by the seat of his pants, it sounds like.
Yeah, because if not for her and then supplemented by others, would this paper have ever existed? No. So they would have had that message, which seemed to be the full pivot to something else, which thankfully, thanks to Grant Schultz and others who threw up the flag, but mostly, you know, people like Kaylee, and then Grant is like, excuse me, I need you all to hear this. This was cut off from really going much further than this, because this does feel like the part where there's now going to be a turn and like, okay, let's introduce this idea and see how people react to that. And then where can we take the church from here? It's really good that she had these questions, because like without people like her, you know, who knows like what would have happened had that not happened.
Yeah, I think it says something that having to put these ideas down on paper did a lot of damage.
Yeah.
To them working, you know, the idea that like just having to answer questions in writing, like how do these ideas function, was such a problem that it caused all, you know. Yeah.
So pretty cool teenager.
Yeah.
And a cool person now.
Yeah, I can't wait to see the movie.
Yeah. So, as I said...
So this is our last episode, right?
Yeah. So there might be another episode and then in the last episode, because now I've found a portal into something else and whatnot. So, of course, nope, this is not the last episode. And again, if you're listening and got your story, we are here.
Yeah. If you were a cool teenager, email Jodie at mail@coolunusualpunishment.com.
Exactly. So, thank you to Kaylee Evergreen for sharing this story. I really appreciate it. Yeah. It was incredibly honest and puts into perspective some things, especially just considering her at such an early age, being able to have the presence of mind to question this stuff is pretty amazing. So, yeah, thank you so much for listening, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Stay tuned. Chosen is presented by Cool and Unusual Punishment. Research and interviewing by Jodie Haas, with editing and mixing by Tyler Haas. Our theme music for this series is by Zavely. You can find more music by him on Apple Music. Just search for Zavely, Xavly. This podcast is a proud member of the Nerd and Tie Network, a coalition of Wisconsin-produced shows that you can find at nerdandtie.com. You can also join the discussion in the forums at nerdandtie.social. You can reach us directly by sending us a message on our Facebook page or by emailing us at mail@coolandunusualpunishment.com. You can find links to all of these things and more in our show notes by visiting our website, coolandunusualpunishment.com. How's that for people taking you seriously?